Hey guys, welcome back. It's Plant Genius. So today we're going to be talking about xylem tissues, which is the water conducting tissues, and we're going to be talking about the specific type of cells or tissues that reside inside of it. So let's get into it. Okay. So basically, xylem has two types. There's two types of like tissues that kind of are inside like xylem. So there can be like the vessels, which are pretty much like continuous tubes that line up the cells, and then just like water just continues to flow up through it. And there's tracheids, which are they kind of do the same thing, but they're smaller, so they don't conduct as much water, and they're kind of like supporting tissues, if that makes sense. So that's kind of like the difference. So with flowering plants, they need more water, or they need water faster, so they need to have more of the vessels, so they can continue to have that water going throughout their cells, compared to like the gymnosperms and like the non-flowering plants, things like that, like ferns. And I more so use tracheids to like help them conduct water throughout their cells, and they're both xylem tissues. Um, so so what I wanted to like really like talk about today is like one thing I find really interesting, especially when it's about like talking about your plants, is like tracheids, because they're key factors as like water conducting tissues. So like with plants, like they use what's called osmosis, right? So osmosis is the movement of water from a high in concentration to a lower concentration through a semipermeable membrane. So it's like there's this membrane. Let's pretend it's a membrane. This will decide what comes in and out the cell, right? So for the process of like for photosynthesis, um, the plant needs transpiration and photosynthesis kind of goes hand in hand, because transpiration is the process of water going coming from the roots, through the xylem up the roots and then through the leaves and out of it as it transpires, because the leaves need water to water for photosynthesis to actually occur. So when they're photosynthesizing, like that rate of transpiration, is what depends on how fast water is going throughout the cells, right? So like let's say like the environment outside, like let's say we're in a tropical environment, right? So if you have like some palms or things like that, so the rate of transpiration would be slower, because since there's more water out, a little more water outside the cell compared to inside the cell, like the water's going like out slower. But if like we're in an arid desert place, there's going to be literally like little to none like water moisture in the air compared to all that in the cells, and then the water comes out faster, right? Now when we look at that, like, we kind of see that like water is like the main driver of our functions on plants, right? Like it keeps plants like firm. It also makes sure the plants are able to photosynthesize, and it also makes sure that we get moisture in its transpiration, right? And a lot of issues that stem from your plants is the fact that like the system of like the water being conducted in a plant is either like dysregulated or something's messing it up, right? Because like let's say like you start to see like the leaf tips browning, right? That might be because like there's so much water like transpiring out, because again, like, the roots could be disturbed. There's a lot of moisture inside the cell but not outside the cell, so a lot of moisture is being pulled out, or it's just like something's disturbed, right? And that causes issues, and then causes your like plants to like droop. It causes them to brown. It causes them to just like look not healthy, because water is the main driver. Like just like us, like water makes up like 85 to 95% of the body of a plant. Something to us. So it's like looking at water. Like water is always going to be like one of the most key factors when like kind of paying attention, because it's either that the flow of water is being obstructed, or that there's like a issue with obtaining water or absorbing water, like in the case of roots, right? So then, like, comparing ourselves, like again, like we were talking about like palm trees compared to like cactuses. So cactus have what are called like wide band tracheids, right? So these wide band tracheids. So do you see kind of how like these like thick walls, like thick these walls are? So these help to contain water, right? So they store water. So like water stress would just be like the lack of water. So over time, as water stress continues, they shrink, but they don't necessarily like dysregulate or like kind of lose their shape, right? They keep their structure, they just get a little smaller, because as the water's leaving their cell. So that's why like cactuses are able to survive in like droughts or like arid environments, because like first, if it was any other plant, if they were losing water, their cells would lose structure, and they would be flaccid, things like that. But because they have these specialized secondary walls in their trachea tissues, which are these wide bands, it helps them to contain water. So instead of like losing their like structure when they lose water, they just maintain it and they just shrink, right? But when we look at like the common tracheids in like a normal plants, like it's kind of that same structure, but it's not as thick. And then it starts to like dysregulate and lose its shape, and it starts to shrink. And then you see like how it's going to start to disorient, and then it just like it shrivels, and then that's what happens. So this is kind of the difference between like cactuses and palms, and that's why like for palm trees and stuff, you have to keep them more of in a moist environment because like if the moisture content outside of the cell is less than the moisture or is way less than like normal moisture capacity, then their cells are going to start to shrink. But if they have some moisture outside the cell as well, it'll help to slow down that rate of transpiration, which is the water leaving the cell, so then the cells can stay firm. But for cactuses, since they're used to dry environments and they have these specialized cells, they don't need to have that moisture because they already are used to like being able to just to store and contain the water that they need. So cactuses don't need moisture, and then things like palms and tropical plants do need moisture because again, like that rate of transpiration, the osmosis process is what's depending on what's how much water is outside the cell because again, like osmosis is a concentration of water from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. So depending on the concentration of water outside the cell, that'll affect the rate of transpiration. So you want for palms, you want more of a moist environment, so it'll help slow down the transpiration process, so water isn't sapped from the environment. Because again, they're not used to having dry environments. They want moisture because it helps with their process of transpiration. But for cactuses, you don't want any moisture because again, they store other water and they'll regain it as you like water them like maybe like monthly or something like that. So I know that was kind of a lot of information, but that's just kind of like the difference and the importance of like the xylem. Because again, like the xylem is the tissues that control water throughout the plant. And again, like with osmosis, understanding how like water moves throughout your plant, you'll be able to like analyze and diagnose your plants more efficiently. Because again, like let's say you have a tropical plant near like a HVAC system, okay, and we just talked about like osmosis and transpiration, right? So if a plant that's used to like high humidity is near something that is producing dry air, what happens? Well, now water is getting sapped out of the leaves at an extremely high rate, right? Because there's no moisture outside the cell, right? And those type of plants are used to moisture outside the cell because again, they want that slow rate of transpiration, right? They want the water to leave their cells slowly, not fast. And what causes water to leave the cells fast is dry environments because again, there's no water on the outside. And water likes to balance. So it'll leave from high concentration to go to lower concentrations. But again, that's sapping all the water out of the palm, right? So again, like, we just, when we're looking at like issues in our plants, like what type of environment is our plant in and why is it acting the way it is? Because once you can like, again, you see other parts, you understand how the plant works, then you're able to diagnose more efficiently. And then like even with like the browning tips, the reason why that happens is like the tips at the end, like the leaf tips at the end are like they're least likely to get the water. Like they're the last on the chopping block of getting water. So when there's an issue with water, the leaf tips will start to brown because the water's not reaching it, and they have like less veins to actually help each cell get water. So once you start to see like leaf tip browning, then you're like, okay, there's something wrong with like the water conduction inside my plant. Maybe it's the roots, maybe it's the temperature, maybe it's the environment, but something's causing the issue that's not allowing water and minerals to conduct fully throughout the plant. So it's just like things like that. But again, I know that was a lot, guys, but if you guys need help, let me know. And remember, I may be a plant genius, but you can be a plant genius too. Thank you guys for watching, and peace.